This is the Claim Your Day podcast. I'm your host, Nick Maisie. If you're tired of drifting and you're ready to start living intentionally according to your values, you're in the right place, my friend. We're here to help you lead with excellence at home, at work, and in your community so you can live with significance. Let's bridge the gap between who you are today and who you are called to be. Now is the time for you to claim your day. Have you ever said yes to a project, a social event, some sort of commitment, a request from somebody else? Have you ever said yes, and then the second those words left your mouth, you felt that pit in your stomach, and you knew you didn't have the time. You knew that it would take away from your kids, your family time, other commitments, or just your mental space, which is extremely important. But you said it. You said it anyways, because you didn't want to seem, uncooperative, unproductive, or selfish. Maybe you wanted to help them out too, which is a good thing. But now that you've said yes, you don't have your time. You know you're going to be stretched and overloaded. Now that you said yes, you're already getting exhausted, overwhelmed, and maybe even a little bit resentful. Well, John Maxwell talks about the law of sacrifice, about how a leader must give up in order to go up. Most people think that sacrifice is about giving up bad things. But for the intentional leader, sacrifice is often more about giving up good things to make room for the best things, the great things. And if you can't say no to a distraction, then you might be sacrificing your real purpose. You might be sacrificing the great on the altar of someone else's agenda for the good. And today we're closing out the Decision Filter series, by tackling one of the biggest barriers to your progress. That's guilt. the yes that comes with guilt, or being guilted into saying yes. We're going to learn how to simplify things by mastering the strategic no so that you can stop drifting and start leading with intentionality. Now, before we dive into this episode's key topics, quick announcement. You don't want to miss this next series. It's going to be all about, stopping the drift and aligning our actions with our values. But it's going to be a lot more than that. I'm going to have some big announcements in there. And it's be a very intentional, going to be an introduction to how this podcast is going to go forward to really help you to make progress, in stopping the drift, aligning your actions with your values, living with intentionality, with purpose and significance. And we're going to get into a whole lot of the good stuff in this next series is going to be an introduction to that, to kind of open the gateway for that we're going to go through together to really make an impact in our lives and in the lives of others. So don't miss that next series. I'm already really excited about it. But before that next series, we have to talk about today's main points. And as always, I have just a few key points for you today, all about that strategic no. And the first one is we're talking about this one's just about the guilt gap. It's really looking at our values versus our expectations. We can feel guilty when we say no because we're measuring our worth, our own worth, by other people's expectations instead of our values. Now, if you flip it around and you make your decisions based on your values, then you're not going to have this level of guilt. The guilt is actually a signal that you've misaligned somewhere with your priorities. If you feel guilty for saying no to a late night call, but you don't feel guilty about missing your child's bedtime, then that filter might be broken. Well, and as you know, we're in the Decision Filter series right now, so we have to look at how we're filtering our choices and how we're making these decisions. See, the truth is that you're not responsible for someone's reaction to your healthy boundaries. Think about that. You're not responsible for someone else's reaction to your healthy boundaries. Oh my gosh, I should do a whole podcast on just that sentence right there. See, you're only responsible for your stewardship of your time. So if you're aligning your time, your decisions, your actions with your values, your core values that are most important to you, then you're on the right track, my friend, and that decision filter is going well. But if you feel responsible for how other people react when you set those healthy boundaries, when you live out your values, then you got to do a little self-check. You got to do a self-check. So that's that first one, really looking at our values versus other people's expectations. The second point is really, like I talked about at the beginning, it's all about that law of the sacrifice. Second point is, you can't reach the summit, of your worthwhile climb. Did that whole series a little bit ago. Everything worthwhile is uphill all the way. So you can't reach the summit of those worthwhile goals in the life you want to live if you're carrying around someone else's luggage, living to their expectations. To go up to that next level of your leadership or your self-leadership, you have to let go of being liked by everyone. That might be tough. Look, I know I'm saying some big things here. I know this one particularly might be tough. I'm not saying that you got to make people dislike you or hate you or anything like that. It's not about that. But it's about, you can't sacrifice your values, your goals, the purpose for your life just to be able to meet other people's expectations. That's not where it's at. The real leadership move, high capacity leaders are these intentional leaders. They understand that a no, it's not rejecting the other person. When you say yes to your values and by that you have to say no to something, you're not rejecting that person. You're just protecting the priority of living out and honoring your values, living in a way and acting in a way that is aligned with your values. That's what it is. You're not rejecting the person. You're just saying yes to your values. And if you don't have the courage to sacrifice the good opportunities, then you're never going to have the space and that margin, the capability to seize the great ones. And that's what this is all about. This podcast and everything that we talk about, it's all about leaning into the great, and living out your values in a way that's aligned with what's most important to you, your life, your family, living in that way and leading your life and impacting others in a way that is aligned with your values. That is so much greater and so much more important than just meeting other people's expectations. So I want you to think about this. Do you have the courage to say no to the good opportunities so that you can have the space and the capability to seize the great opportunities that come your way? Do you have that courage? Well, if so, don't get too hard on yourself, but use that as a data point to think about, hey, I might need to work on this. All right. So that's the second point. It's all about, giving up to go up, the law of the sacrifice. The third point for this episode is just the graceful no. It's just the graceful no. Most of us, like I said at the very beginning, a lot of times we say yes to things because we don't either know how to say no without sounding cold. We're trying to be professional. We want to help people. Look, I want to help people. I get it 100%. In fact, that's why I do the podcast. That's why I do a lot of the things that I do. Is because I care about people and I want to help them reach their potential and pursue their best lives. But even with a love and a caring for people, if we're always saying yes to other people's requests, expectations, desires, then we're going to end up saying no to the things that are really important. But sometimes we say yes because we don't know how. We don't want to be cold. We don't want to reject people. So what if you had a little bit of a script or a way to say no that didn't sound so cold? Or even, hey, here's a little trick. I'm going to talk about it in the action steps at the end. You can practice it, and when you practice it, it feels better and easier because you've done it a couple of times, so you're ready to do this. All right. So what might this look like? It can be something as simple as this, and you can use your own words 100%. You don't have to use a script that I'm want to share. It can be something as simple as, thank you so much for thinking of me for this project. However, to ensure that I stay committed with my current primary goals, and my family. You can mention values here, but it might be a little bit tough how it comes across. But just to mention, just to stay committed to my current primary goals and projects, I have to pass at this time. Have you reached out to so-and-so? Because what you're doing right there when you say, have you reached out to so-and-so? Then you're giving them an option. This is a great way to look at it. It's you thanking them for it. That's kind of like a bridge. And then, however, to ensure that I stay committed on X, Y, and Z, I have to pass. That's the no. And then you redirect and give them an option. Have you reached out to so and so, or I'd love to connect you with so and so. They might be able to help, or hey, actually, but I do have this resource. It could be helpful. So it's not just being a hard no. You're thinking it's great that they thought of you. It probably means that they value your input. They know that you would do a good job. That's wonderful. Thank them for that, and then tell them no. You can give them a reason why, or not. That's your freedom. You then say no, and then you can give them a resource, a redirect, a suggestion, something like that. See, here's a key though: is don't over-explain the no. One sentence is enough. When you start talking and talking and talking, then it comes across a whole lot worse. So you could even tighten this up a little bit and get it down to just one or two sentences. Whatever makes you feel a little bit more comfortable while being professional, that shows that you really are being intentional with saying no. It's not just carte blanche, no, or not just no across the board for everything, but you just have to say no at this time. And it's going to be a million times better than if you went and talked for the next 5 minutes about why you can't do it. All right. So that's it. Those are the three main points for this episode. We have to look at the guilt gap. Looking at our values versus other people's expectations. Look at the law of the sacrifice and what we're giving up to go up. To be intentional about what you give up, and then to the best of our ability, we can say a no gracefully. And sometimes that takes practicing what you're going to say before it comes up. I've talked a good bit about this, about pre-deciding and then living out our decisions. Makes it a whole lot easier than trying to decide in the moment what we're going to do. Helps us to be more intentional. Well, the same kind of thought process applies right here, and that we're going to be intentional with how we use our yeses and how we use our nos. And with that, sometimes a little bit of practice on doing it before the moment comes up helps us to live out that moment as we would like to. So what are your action steps for this episode? Well, I want you to do a note on it. Identify one thing that's on your calendar that you've said yes to because maybe you felt a little bit guilty or some pressure. And if possible, go back and gracefully decline or delegate it today. Look at your commitments. Look at what you committed to. Where are you stretched too thin? Where have you said yes that it really should have been a no? Where can you step back and reevaluate and be a little bit more intentional with it? Do it with some grace and professionalism, some courtesy, being kind. While at the same time, make sure that you're honoring your values and what is really, truly most important to you, your life, your family, the things like that. Look at your calendar and make sure that what you're doing is honoring what's truly most important. And here's a way that you can have that conversation and make it a little bit easier is practice it. Use that mirror. That mirror is a wonderful resource. Practice the graceful no in the mirror. Say it out loud a couple times until it feels more natural. Maybe it feels more like a statement rather than a request for permission to be able to say no. Practice it. Look, it's the same way that you would do before an interview, or same way that I would do before any important or challenging conversation. I practice it a whole lot. It's great because then when you're in the moment, maybe it's a little bit uncomfortable, maybe it's a little bit challenging, maybe you're a little bit nervous, apprehensive, whatever. When those feelings and nerves and heart rate's up a little bit, it's so much easier for the words to come out of your mouth how you want them to when you've practiced. That doesn't mean that you have to memorize a script forward and backward, but when you practice it a lot, it's wonderful because that little connection in your brain that helps you to say those words you want to say, it gets stronger. It gets stronger. It cuts a groove in your brain so that way, when it's a little bit more challenging, when the pressure's on, you're in that moment, it's so much easier for you to do it because you've practiced it. Look, I want you to be intentional with your yeses and your nos because those decisions, those choices and are going to guide your life. It is. The choices that you make and the actions that follow those choices, that ends up making up your life. So make sure that you're being intentional with those because this is your life, my friend. Guide it to go in the direction that you want it to go. And so what are your kind of takeaways after this? If you want to take some more steps, like if you're looking toward a little bit more prioritization, or maybe you're struggling with the yeses and the nos, and it would be helpful for you to get crystal clear on your true core values, the five most important values for your life. If that would be helpful, you can go to nickmazy.com/guide, get the intentional choice guide. It's a simple worksheet, but it'll help you look at your values and what's most important to you from a few different angles to help you really get crystal clear on those, because then you can take actions that are aligned with your values once you're clear on what they are and you see them written down right in front of you. It's very, very powerful. If you're ready to be more intentional on how you spend your yeses and nos, interested in stopping the drift and want to become intentional with living out your values on a daily basis, then I encourage you to come check out the Life Leaders community. It's not open yet as of this podcast episode coming out. But to get more information, you can go to nickmazy.com/lifeleaders. Would love to have you a part of that and to know that you're interested, so we can kind of help put the pieces together to serve you best. Look, your legacy is not built on things you could have done. It's built on the things you actually did. Don't let guilt steal your progress. Don't sacrifice the best on the altar of the good because of someone else's expectations. Instead, intentionally sacrifice the good so that you can claim your best. Claim your day, my friend. And as always, thank you for listening, and I can't wait to talk to you again in the next episode.